So we're going to go ahead and start. Thank you, everyone, for showing up and braving your way through the security and traffic and whatever it might have been this morning. I think security is ramping up a little bit again because of all the more higher level people showing up. We're live streaming, and we also have a couple people online that will be providing us with presentations to start off. So welcome everyone again. We will start off with my colleague Valerie, who is in Washington, D.C. She'll be presenting some thoughts on the concept of transformational finance, and then also Sean Stout from Climate Policy Initiative. So the panelists might want to, switch over to be audience members for a moment, and then we'll come back to sitting in the panel. So can we get Valerie Laxton from WRI?
Hello, can you hear me, Kaya?
We can hear you. We can't yet see, but, oh, something's happening. Hang on one second. Now it's black. I see you up there. That's Valerie. So if we just can spotlight that one instead. There you go. Okay. So Valerie, as you can see on the little thumbnail photo of us, that's what we see right now. So,
okay, got it. Can you also see my presentation?
No.
No.
Are you able to present, like, you're currently presenting and it's not showing up instead of your face?
No, I'm not. The presentation should have been sent to you.
Oh.
To Jessim.
Let's do the presentation. Yeah. Okay, it's coming. But now we all seen what you look like. So now it's good to know.
Okay, I think that might be the other presentation. Okay, I think we can start, right?
Yep.
It should be there. Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be joining you today, even if online. I hope you can hear me well. My name is Valerie Laxton. I'm a senior associate at the World Resources Institute, so I work with Gaia. And I'm going to present joint work from I4CE, the Institute for Climate Economics, with Sarah Bendau and Guillaume Potier, and WRI. So myself, together with my colleague Caroline Nobel, on how to define transformational finance. What does it mean? And we'll sketch out possible characteristics, how to characterize this type of finance, and we'll look into how mobilizing high impact and transformational finance for sustainable development actually advances the objectives of the Baku to Belém roadmap. Next slide, please. We should have a next slide. It doesn't look quite like what I have.
No.
Still next, sorry. That's my title slide, and the next slide, please. No problem. Here we are. So the existing definitions that we surveyed of transformational finance actually coalesce around these three attributes: long-term relevance, structural impact, and sustainable. And these are taken from multilateral organizations and initiatives, the World Bank, among others. And these are really some elements to work from. Such transformational finance should be relevant in the long term, have structural impacts, and be sustainable. So what do we mean by this? Well, number one, long-term, that finance should be relevant in the long term, so align with the national and subnational country-owned pathways for low emissions and climate resilient development. And these are elements such as long-term strategies. These represent country pathways, national development plans, or other domestic planning documents. And second pillar is the structural impacts. It should have structural impact by targeting notably cross-sectoral transformations, enabling innovation, and addressing foundational barriers. And by foundational barriers, we mean there might be barriers within policies, structures in the markets, or institutional structures that impede this transformation in the country. And then the third pillar is about sustainability. So sustainability means embedding financial, political, and social mechanisms that are particular to the country and that ensure lasting stakeholder engagement and institutional resilience. So this pillar is about finding the way to manage the trade-offs across economic, environmental, and social dimensions in a way that's equitable and to ensure a just transition. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a bit of a busy slide, but there are many barriers to transformational finance tracking because a standard definition of transformational finance is still lacking across stakeholders. So too so it makes things difficult for tracking. It prevents tracking financial flows for sustainable outcomes and to ensure that outcomes are sustainable. So these are barriers that impede analysis and are challenges notably for implementing Article 2.1c, if you see transformation in those terms. And these barriers pertain to the definition, the time horizon, non-linearities, data availability, capacity limitations, and stakeholder engagement. I'll take a couple of examples. Let's take the example of non-linearities. If you think about systemic change, it may be non-linear by definition, and often it interacts with endogenous variables like institutional, political, or social factors that are very difficult to quantify. And that, of course, matters for capacity. Many institutions lack the analytical capacity or staffing or just the systems to implement and track nonlinear theories of change. And so these might be mixed methods of evaluation or system level metrics, and these are oftentimes lacking. So then, of course, stakeholder engagement is completely essential because effectively tracking systems change often requires engagement with a multiplicity of actors. But for that to be effective, you need participatory processes, and these are very resource intensive and difficult to institutionalize. The stakeholders engagement is absolutely essential. Next slide, please. So as a result of these reflections about possible definitions and the barriers, our proposed definition is that transformational finance is a type of finance that seeks to catalyze systemic long-term shifts in financial systems, financial institutions, and behaviors for sustainable development. It allows for country-driven transitions, which in line with the international efforts to address climate change through the Paris Agreement's bottom-up approach, are context-specific and adhere to equity principles. And that type of finance results in systemic changes that manage trade-offs across sustainability dimensions to align with long-term country and development pathways. So this definition focuses on the quality, the strategic deployment, and systemic effects of capital. It highlights that finance needs to be aligned with country-led priorities, and it can bridge mitigation and adaptation, catalyze private investment, and build resilience at scale. So it's really grounded in country context and the Paris Agreement. And the ultimate goal is to achieve low emissions, just, and climate resilient development. Next slide, please. So transformational finance for climate is highly relevant because it offers an operational vision to implement Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement, and it catalyzes the role of PDBs. It complements Article 9 and the NCQG goal, and it enhances transparency. So these are the elements of strategic relevance for transformational finance. It highlights the role of both public and private financial institutions at the national and international level to support the NCQG outcomes. It's relevant because it underscores the role of partnerships in the definition that focuses on systemic change. It reaffirms the complementarity between Article 2.1c and Article 9 of the Paris Agreement, and it underscores the need for strategic deployment of public finance, especially in developing countries, to support systemic change and actually unlock private sector flows. So there's a growing need for credible metrics and classification systems and transition plans to guide investment decisions and avoid greenwashing, and these elements of the definition really cater for that need. Next slide. So to scale transformational finance from all sources, financial institutions, both public and private, need to acknowledge and incorporate these four insights from which to support transformation within their own tools, thanks to the tools that they already have. And four aspects are crucial to that integration into practices of financial institutions, and these are moving beyond isolated projects to longer-term strategic finance to trigger these systemic effects. Secondly, adaptation, which is completely urgent and must be made investable alongside mitigation. Thirdly, enabling environments, and focus on that, on the policies and incentives that shape markets and unlock scale. These must be supported. And then fourthly, collective action, which makes transformation possible ultimately. So I'll go in more detail into each of these four elements one by one. Next slides, please. So moving beyond these isolated projects to a long-term strategic finance view allows for systemic effects to materialize. And this is completely possible. There are financial vehicles that are available to help scale, for example, or replicate and deeply change the way climate is financed. And for example, this chart on the right-hand side of our screen now shows how a number of instruments, for example, bonds or blended finance or grants, these are used for adaptation in the case of this chart on a sample of projects. These are used to reduce or manage risk. And instruments that are listed on the vertical axis are examples of all the types of instruments that are being used right now. And this chart also shows you whether they are pooled or part of large facilities or programs, and that's illustrated on the horizontal axis in a lighter shade of green. And the lighter shade of green represents the project-specific finance, and the darkest shade is all these facilities and pooled instruments. So for example, guarantees, if you take the line on guarantees, they're often assembled in facilities, equity in funds, blended finance in facilities, and that allows going beyond project by project approaches simply by structuring these vehicles. Next slide, please. Secondly, adaptation finance is crucial and urgent. So the divide between mitigation and adaptation actions is sometimes quite artificial. It doesn't always reflect the reality on the ground. And in fact, the methods and technologies that both curb climate change and cope with its impacts, and they already exist, and the two overlap more often than not, and more than is commonly thought. So, for example, investing in solutions that can curb emissions and build resilience simultaneously is crucial. And I've got 6 examples on this slide. Decentralized grids powered by renewables. Actually, they can reduce emissions and better withstand climate impacts, or help recover more rapidly in the event of a climate disaster in the aftermath of floods. So these are, dual solutions. Next slide, please. And to help create the needed and enabling conditions for private sector investments, for example, DFIs can support local governments in developing policy frameworks, clear climate targets, financing plans. These enabling conditions, they can facilitate the development of project pipelines and it's supported based on knowledge of local context. Here, the role of taxonomies is really important. And again, partnerships, extremely important between PDBs and local governments, for example, to develop these frameworks and project pipelines. Next slide, please.
Valerie,
and finally,
are you
yes.
getting close to the end?
Yes, I'm wrapping up.
Okay. Perfect.
Finally, collective action is completely central, and working together through joint approaches. These are 4 types of stakeholders that help translate climate ambition into investable systemic transformation: governments, vertical climate funds, public development banks, and private investors. And next slide, please. The final slide is about mobilizing climate finance through the Baku to Belém roadmap. How does it resonate in the context of the Baku to Belém roadmap? I've listed 5 broad categories of finance that the B2B roadmap identifies as building blocks to mobilize the climate finance needed. And this approach directly underpins the Baku to Belém roadmap. So with that, thanks for your attention, and back to you, Gaia.
Thank you so much, Valerie. I think we're going to move straight on to Sean. Sean, are you online?
Hi, yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, and let's see if we can also somehow magically find your slides. This is Sean from
Great.
CPI, the Climate Policy Initiative. Feel free to also introduce yourself a little bit more if you would like to do so. And
Yeah,
go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Gaia. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean. I'm a senior analyst at CPI, or Climate Policy Initiative. Hopefully, most of you or some of you are familiar with our work. We've been a partner of the IDFC for many years now. But if you don't know, CPI is an analysis and advisory organization that works on all things climate finance, and we have offices across the globe, including in Brazil. But I sit in the climate finance tracking program here in London, where we put out a variety of so-called landscape studies, and those can be global, regional, national, thematic, but so far we've always focused on the quantity of climate finance that's flowing. And to date, we've had little to say on the quality of that finance. So it's great that finally this year we were able to turn our attention to this important topic, which is obviously gaining traction both within and out with the COP processes. So if we could go to the next slide, please. I'll just start with a few points on the context and some scene setting for this. As I'm sure you all know, the need to assess and improve the quality of climate finance has long been acknowledged, parallel to that enduring emphasis on the quantity of flows. But to date, a common understanding of what high-quality climate finance looks like has not yet emerged across multiple different public actors. So we can recognize the real progress made by certain coalition groups in terms of their results, climate finance results measurement, but here we're really talking about a harmonized understanding across the whole spectrum of public actors. So the DFIs, BCF, donor government, and their agencies. And trying to foster that harmonized approaches is really important so that we can avoid siloed work, reduce the fragmentation that we all know about in the global landscape, and ultimately work towards developing an evidence base on the quality of global public climate finance as a whole. So starting to look at, what is working, what is not working, for whom is it working, and what may be scaled or replicated moving forward. So given all this context, CPI has this year developed a framework for understanding quality of climate finance. And yeah, I'll just use my slot today to walk you through the findings of that scoping study, which really just represents a first step in a broader program of work. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Great. Based on extensive review of different public actors' current approaches to results measurement and monitoring, as well as a long and very fruitful stakeholder engagement phase, we developed this 3-level framework for understanding climate finance quality. So it proposes we think about quality in terms of three key levels at which public actors can work. So the project, the market, and the broader system, arguing that the quality of climate finance is really a question of whether flows deliver sustained transformational change at the market and system levels. So moving beyond one-off project interventions and ultimately leading to low emission, climate resilient, and equitable economies. So I'll just unpack a bit more what each level means and then show how we bring all of that together. If we go to the next slide, please. So firstly, at the project level, this is the most common unit of intervention, as I'm sure you all know, historically the primary level at which public actors have worked when deploying their climate finance, which is of course the inputs for mitigation or adaptation projects towards a set of output outcomes and with a view to deliver impact. So since the project level, it's the conventional means of working, I won't dwell on the examples that are shown in the table here, but the takeaway is really that project level results terminology is well established at this point. Public climate finance providers already have or tend to have monitoring and evaluation departments that do project level assessments to understand what's working, and often with a view to then aggregating results at the level of their entire portfolio. And overall, that indicators for assessing quality at the project level can vary widely and can harness the very comprehensive catalog of existing MEL approaches in climate and wider development finance. Next slide, please. So moving to the next level of our framework, the market level is where we start to broaden the perspective beyond the perimeters of those established project level results monitoring to think about how public actors can work to create, develop, or stabilize markets for climate solutions. And that's via the range of approaches shown on the screen here. So that can be addressing market imperfections that create barriers to investment, providing a demonstration effect such that other players in the market can replicate the intervention. It can mean incubator, accelerator programs that nurture and then help to scale nascent climate solutions, as well as enabling technology transfer, addressing path dependence, and funding research and development. So in short, this market level is really about building the demand for and the supply of nascent climate solutions, thinking beyond an isolated project level intervention. Next slide, please. Thanks. So finally, the third layer in our framework, and this is the broadest level at which public actors can work, is that of the system. And that's really about changing guiding paradigms and values, behaviors and attitudes, policies and regulations, and institutional arrangements such that they are consistent with low emission climate resilient activity. So guiding paradigms are the things like net zero, climate justice, these broad values, concepts towards which actors in the system can work. Changing behaviors and attitudes is about shifting norms, often through providing information, educational initiatives. Policies and regulations is, of course, creating or facilitating the long-term policy strategies, legal frameworks, governance structures that are needed to raise ambition on and ultimately implement climate action. And finally, institutional arrangement speaks to the need for inter or intra-organizational structures that can enable that systematic coordination and cooperation within the global landscape. So to sum up, the system level of our framework is really about public actors working at a level that is bigger than the project itself or the market for a particular solution, instead working in terms of shaping the whole food system, the energy system, the transport system, such that they become consistent with low emission climate resilient activity. So bringing all that together, if we could go to the next slide, please. We conclude that transformational climate finance is, by definition, high quality climate finance, and that means delivering positive and sustained change at the market and system levels within which a project intervention sits. And as you can see from this figure here, change is both cumulative and highly circular between the levels, exhibiting feedback loops. So while actors can really deliver tangible results at the project level, the market is really trying to incubate, accelerate, aggregate climate solutions with a view to then influencing the broader system over the long term, while the system in turn enables, shapes, and guides action at the lower level. And this figure shows how your transformational potential increases as you move out towards affecting that market and system level change, while the time horizon for doing so also increases. So on the next slide, we bring this together in terms of a bit of a theory of change template, so showing how the input, climate finance, can yield outputs, activities, outcomes, and impact that corresponds to the three levels. And this visual is really just supposed to bring our framework together in terms of the flow of a results chain. But we could imagine public actors actually using this themselves as a bit of a template or an inspiration when they appraise and design their climate interventions. So ensuring that the theory of change that underlies those interventions and the way they are then implemented is really about affecting change at the market and system level beyond simply the project itself. Finally, on the next slide, we outline these 10 key dimensions that go to the heart of what transformational public climate finance is and provide a basis against which we can start to assess that potential. So here we have the things like accessibility of finance, affordability of finance, due to commercial viability of the interventions, mobilization of additional capital, all of these things that are essential when thinking about how to design a transformational intervention. And here we list them alphabetically, but they really try to represent a balance between provider, donor-centric perspectives, and then also recipient or beneficiary-centric priorities, which is of course really important when we're defining what is transformational and for whom. So that then is really just a high-level summary of that scoping study, which, as I said, represents the first step in the broader program of work. If we could go to the next slide, please, just to end with a little bit on our follow-up work to date and looking ahead. Basically, having published this study outlining how we can think about quality in theory, now we want to actually move towards doing this in practice so that we can start collecting the data, building an evidence base. So to that end, we've been working on a paper that will be published very soon, which really maps the practical indicator base that can be used to operationalize tracking quality at each of the three levels. And then following that, we will do some deeper dive analysis for adaptation and mitigation respectively to try and better capture the nuances given the different contexts that play there. So I'll finish here. Thanks so much for your attention today. We are very receptive to feedback on this framework, how we can fine tune it, also any opportunities for then implementing it in terms of directly gathering data from public actors. But perhaps just as my final closing remark, I think it's important to stress that what we've done to date is try and build off of what's already out there, MEL, climate finance results measurement, what public actors are already doing, and kind of bringing it all together to something a bit more coherent. But what we now really need is also ambition and momentum amongst the diverse set of public actors themselves so that they can come together and work towards harmonization on the basis of a common understanding of quality. So yeah, very much looking forward to the panel discussion today, and I'll hand back over to you in Elaine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to Valerie and to Sean for giving us sort of this overview framework way of thinking about what is transformational finance and how might one measure it and talk about it and such. Now we're going to go to the people here in the room sweating and nice and toasty. Perhaps we would want to flip over and come up to the panel. We have with us Nancy Sake from the EIB, Chief Climate Change Expert. We have Attica from the AFD, Deputy Head of Climate and Nature. And then we also have Aurélien from IFC, Global Head of Climate Finance. So we're going to go from this more framework, high-level presentations to a little bit more concrete, perhaps, conversation of, okay, how does this work within the three institutions where you are located? And so maybe I can start with you, 'cause I know you have to run a little bit early. So maybe could you share with us just how you interpret transformational finance within your work, and how do you try to ensure that investments have that type of an impact?
Thank you very much for organizing an event on transformational finance. I think it is totally timely, and it is really important that we tackle this topic, and that we have to talk beyond the volumes. Before talking on behalf of AFD and how we have already translated within our procedures and our tracking, I just want to say a few words as the co-chair of the climate working group of the IDFC, the pavilion that is hosting us. So IDFC has been part of the work that was described by WRI, and with I4C, UNEP-FI, and PRI. And we have seen like a strong interest, notably from the members of the PRI, Principle for Responsible Investment. So the private sector is waiting for us as how do we use efficiently public money? How do we allocate it efficiently? And transformational finance is a way to do so. We have, I repeat what has been said, but there was a launch of this paper, and that is how we interpret as IDFC members transformational finance. And now I go back to being AFD, French Development Agency. And what we have done, we have a new strategy, climate and nature strategy. Since July, it was approved by our board, and it's the summary is already on our website. What we have put in our strategy is 3 pillars. We go from the fact that we have been pioneer in aligning 100% of our activities with Paris Agreement objectives. We have reached high levels of climate finance, more than 60% now, even though our objectives were 50%. And what we were thinking on climate is that there are 2 aspects that are really important, is not to look anymore on talking on volumes. Of course, we want to do high volumes, but it's to look at the effect, the systemic effect of our climate finance, to look at the quality, to try to use most efficiently possible the climate finance that we are providing to our partners. And then I will not go on the rest of our strategy, but there is a lot of things on biodiversity. And going from that, we have used a tool that we already have internally, which is called the Sustainable Development Analysis. So every single project that AFD is appraising has to go through a process of an analysis for the contribution to SDGs. This analysis is done by a department that is different from the operations department. They don't belong to the same executive direction. It's a way to ensure that they are totally independent, like they are a third part. And they are not bound to the same objectives. Us at the Climate and Nature Division, we are in the operations department, so we are bound to the same objectives of a lot of volumes of new board financing approvals and these kind of things. This department, Sustainable Development Analysis, is independent, and they can ask the question and challenge us as much as they want. We have different dimensions of analysis, and the 2 that are of interest for us today are the ones on climate, so low carbon and resilience. We have totally reshaped these 2 analysis grids in the beginning of the year in order to include the tracking of transformational finance. So the grid goes from -2 to +3. And if we are in negative, that means it's not Paris aligned, so we cannot finance it. And then if it's positive, the more positive it is from 2 to 3, then it is accounted for as transformational finance. And what we are looking at in these grids that can be found on our website, it's several levels of action to track the transformational finance. First, the public policies, so the governance level, the national level. And as it was said previously, it's first the structural effect, but also the long term. How do we ensure that it has a long-term impact? For instance, it could be budgetary decisions, these kind of things, or regulatory decisions. This is the first level of action. The second level of action is at the actors level, the stakeholders level. It's something that is key in our new strategy. We already did that, looking at beyond the project. How do we transform the actor itself so that it has an impact on all its operations? but here it's even stronger in our new strategies. So this is the second levers of action where we look at the amplitude of the effect, but also the durability of the effect. The third aspect, it's also innovative and innovation. If we are supporting innovative schemes, that can be a solution either for mitigation or adaptation, and that could have the potential of being replicated. For instance, when we started to finance all of us renewable energy, and I was based in Egypt before, it was first done with public capital, public funding, because of the fact that it was new and you need to have all the right contractual frameworks, all the right incentives for the private sector to come in. And then afterwards, the private sector came in. So we believe that this support to innovation in order to mainstream it is also accounted for as transformational finance. And the last levers of action that is in this grid of analysis, it's actually everything that is improving the capacity. So capacity building, as long as it's strong enough and durable enough. Or training or a lot of things could enter into this level of action. So there are these three levels of action, and then there are different levels. And according to the level of the impact and the durability of the impact, it could be accounted for as transformational or not. And we have done a back testing on our portfolio to see what would be the already existing transformational finance. We are all already doing it, even if we are not qualifying it as such. And we were close to 40-45% of our portfolio in the last years that was already transformational. And we have put in our roadmap, because it's a new concept, even though we are already tracking now. We have put a target of 50% of our climate finance that would be transformational. So we started to use that grid that I just described in January this year. So in the first quarter of next year, we will have a knowledge of how much we have actually in terms of transformational finance. And I wanted just to talk about one project that allowed us to be accounted for climate finance, which would have not been the case without this change and this revolution in terms of assessment. We have done a policy-based loan of just transition in South Africa. So we are supporting the transition through the just part of the transition through support to both social protection, but also job transition from the coal to renewable energy, and you know the situation in South Africa. If you look at the common principles, the way they are written, it's not a low carbon, it's not a resilient, so it shouldn't be climate finance. But at the same time, this operation is really key. It's instrumental for the acceptability of the transition in South Africa. And as part of the JETP program or investment program, there were references to the just part and it's really essential to support all the changes and all the revolutions that are asked with getting out of coal. So with this new methodology, we have decided, after really long debates internally, really long, to account for this operation as of just transition operation as climate finance. And it's a way also to recognize and to give the incentives to work even more on the just part. There is a lot of demand of our partners, but it's also something that we know in our own countries. In France, we had a lot of protests when we tried to have a carbon tax. It's not something that is only in the developing world. So it's really important to acknowledge that part. And I think this transformational finance is also a way to capture all this side financing that is core to support to the transition. And I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you for those examples as well, and also for bringing in the just transition concept, which, yeah. IFC, how do you talk about transformation? Do you talk about transformation, and how do you try to measure it?
No, actually, that's where I would start. I don't think we have many institutional definition, like cross MDB definition. Transformational finance is not one we have at the moment, at least to my knowledge. That said, I think it's very much aligned in the spirit with what we're doing in practice already and with our strategy. And when our president at Topanga talks about smart development, it's about like development finance that has impact, contributing to growth, employment, jobs, etc., with climate co-benefit in terms of mitigation adaptation. So capturing this for us is very much in the spirit of transitional finance. If you ask for my interpretation of adaptation finance, of transformational finance, I would say three dimensions. One is, and I don't think it was capture or like explicit in the framework that was presented by CPI, but it's a dimension of innovation, doing things differently, either through our own operation or in the way we work with our client in terms of product offering, etc. So that dimension of innovation is important, but innovation that can be scalable and have can be replicable and scalable. That's another dimension. And then the third dimension is I think where what is well captured in the framework is on outcome and impact. Why we're doing this, and ideally leading to changing systemic changes in terms of impact. So this is where would we see the three dimensions that align well with what we're trying to do in general as part of a strategy and for climate in particular. On how this very concretely within the World Bank Group and IFC gets implemented. First dimension has been on mainstreaming climate through the systematic assessment for transition risk and physical risk of all our investments on the IFC side. I think that goes across industries, across sector, across geography. Then it's not, and the mainstreaming also being due to the fact that like climate is not something that is owned by a single central team. It's been mainstream throughout the institution, throughout our operation. So that has contributed to, in the way we operate, something transformational also in our own operation. The second aspect is, and again, it touched upon the framework and how we operate upstream, either at the policy level and helping have the enabling environment and removing the barrier for investment and getting to have the right incentive for smart development, or when it comes to the IFC side, directly supporting the development and doing co-development of project, not only coming downstream when it comes to financing, but trying to go early on and make sure the projects are as sustainable as possible and have that dimension to be part of an ecosystem of that will have replicate and will be also replicable and will help change the whole system. The third dimension, and that's something that we work on like very closely with the other MDBs, is how to move from volume of climate finance to better measuring outcome and ultimately impact. And I think there's a need, and that's where we're going to, and that's part of the quality of climate finance discussion, to go how to stop, as much as we want to have the quality upfront on how we define climate finance, etc., how we move from this debate to reconcile down the road on how we measure the actual impact and the quality of the climate finance being measured at that stage. And I think over the last 2 years was first announced at COP28, I think, or COP29. I think it's been a lot of work. We have this common framework with the other MDBs where we started to define these common metrics that, depending on where we operate, we actually start using the same definition. And when it comes to the World Bank Group, again, beyond having and measuring the billions of dollars that go into development finance and climate finance, we have a corporate scorecard with 22 indicators now, including 2 directly related to climate in terms of net GHG emission and one for adaptation that we track and we publish. So I finish with one concrete example because for me that's like all this is conceptual, but when I think of transformational finance, I think like a perfect example to me is Mission 300 that was launched between like as a partnership first between the World Bank Group and the African Development Bank. Now has many other partners, and again it was how can we operate differently between the public sector, the private sector, working together with different MDBs and partners to bring change at scale and like bring electricity to 300 million people on the African continent by 2030. And this has the innovation I was talking about. This has the replicability. We go with some moving from individual project to project that can be scaled, whether it's mini grid, whether it's off-grid solar, etc. That can be scaled from and packaged from country to country, and it would have like very tangible impact in terms of number of people, and it's already tens of millions of people that have connection to power now and making the like whole health system, education system, and economies more resilient. So that's really how I try to think of transformational. So more in a mindset of what we try to implement to change how we do development finance, rather than very precisely coming up with a framework.
Yeah, thank you so much. So essentially, might be using different words, but trying to get to similar endpoint of
Absolutely.
big impact, and use of the funding that we do have for maximum impact based on what we're able to do. Nancy, I know you guys also don't really use transformational finance as a term that you focus on, but maybe you can share, how you nonetheless kind of work around this idea in the green and climate finance space.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting EIB. So it's always good to be at the IDFC Pavilion. And we work very closely, obviously, as MDBs with IDFC on climate finance definitions and so on. I'm going to put a slightly different context on this discussion. I think perhaps partly because we are a bank that primarily finances projects, but these can be also programs of projects. Well, we do not do pure policy lending to governments. That's not something we do. It's not in our statutes. But nevertheless, we are very, very concerned about the quality of what we do and the quality of the climate projects and the quality of the support that we give to our clients, whether they're public or private, and the long-term effectiveness of that, because obviously we are a long-term investor. We are interested in the delivery of results, whether it's from a project or a program or from technical assistance that is sustainable in all senses. So I would just come back to the quality of climate finance for a bit, because I do think there's a little bit of a danger here that if we start talking as the only issue is really the whole systemic change, and I do think systemic change is absolutely critical, that we also forget one very important thing, that the actual quality of the climate finance itself must be based on robust definitions and actually delivering climate results. If we go too woolly, I'm afraid to say, I'm saying this as the chair of the MDB Climate Reporting Group, if we go too woolly, we might lose sight of the fact that we're supposed to be working towards, and I'm sorry to strongly disagree with the first presentation, 1.5 degrees temperature goal. The outcome of the Dubai COP was that all the parties agreed that they would make every effort to deliver NDC3s that are 1.5 degrees compatible. I know very well what the Paris Agreement says, but the temperature goal is not well below 2. It is well below 2 with efforts to keep it to 1.5. So just whoever did those slides, maybe you want to just edit that a bit. We are strategically aligned with 1.5. I know that for many of the MDBs, they quote the complete temperature goal, but it's very important that we understand that for many countries, that is an incredibly important point. So I would just reiterate the need for the first step of robustness and quality is to be really sure that you're delivering mitigation and adaptation results. The second thing is, indeed, as Aurelian said, trying to think how we, I wouldn't say move away from volume, because I don't think we'll ever move away from volume, but add to volume this very important issue of wider impacts in the systems. And here I would definitely support the issues that have been mentioned on just transition, but I would also say gender, fragility and conflict. And we do look at those things, and we do tag them and report on them. We don't have a specific target, but it doesn't mean that we think they're not important. We think they're incredibly important. And they're very important in terms of long-lasting systemic impact of the climate finance that we do. Similarly, looking at how we deliver on SDGs is something we do at EIB for every project, or we do look at which SDGs are being delivered on and the metrics for that. But we also have a green finance target. And the way that we report it is we also look, sorry, just to be clear, so the rest of green is based on the EU taxonomy, actually. So as well as mitigation and adaptation, the other four are biodiversity protection and restoration of ecosystems, depollution, transition to a circular economy, and sustainable use and protection of water resources. So we also track where we have overlaps, where we deliver, if you like, on more than one objective, on climate and other environmental objectives. And I do think that that is also part of systemic change. If you can deliver on more than one objective and at the same time on SDGs and social objectives, then we're doing what we need to do as MDBs. We're being transformational in multi-directions. So I would say that's important. We have worked with the MDBs on different levels of, sorry, I just lost my picture, different levels of climate results metrics. And in that structure, we have identified, different levels. There's the global context, there's the country context, then there's the project and program context, and that includes our technical assistance for clients. And then there's our own context, how we're transforming ourselves, if you like. And in that middle bit, I really want to pick up on this sort of cross-cutting aspect. So this is looking at how we support our clients, whether they are cities, countries, corporates, banks, on their transition plans, on their Paris alignment plans, on their resilience plans, and importantly, on their just transition plans, and on their gender plans, and how we are supporting them to integrate all those things into what they are doing on climate. Because, and here I totally agree with Aurelian, in that area where we are doing advisory and capacity building, the numbers can be tiny in terms of volume, but the impact and the result can be huge. And that's perhaps where we have some of our most systemic change. But I come back to what I said at the beginning. Actually, you still need to focus on good projects that deliver long-term results, that are actually targeting the 1.5 degrees goal, really delivering resilience, and which hopefully are standard setters and system changes in their own right by showing what can be done and how you can support all types of clients to do that.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I want to take a moment actually to open for questions. If there's anybody from the audience who, on any of the things that have been said, want to add or clarify or, yes, please. And please do introduce yourself. Oh.
I'm Jeanette Gurung, and I'm the director of WOCON, and we have something called the W+ standard, which I think you guys don't know about. But I was really happy to hear you talk about outcomes-based measurement. I would say outcomes-based finance is also transformative, but also gender. And just to say that we have a way to measure a women's empowerment outcome and then create a credit out of it. And the credit can be stacked onto a carbon credit, for example. And I think these kind of arrangements are innovative, market-based. And then I think what's also transformative is that we require a benefit sharing mechanism with women's organizations at the community level. And by doing this, we can tap mitigation finance to fund adaptation that's locally led. And I think some of our little innovations don't get understood or picked up by all of you guys in the big institutions. But for us, the key is the outcome-based measurement. That's what holds people accountable, like GCF, who has great gender policies, but is having trouble making it happen at the ground level. So I just want to say thanks for your attention.
Can I just add something to that? It was a very important point. And yeah, we finance a lot of very big projects. So we're probably one of those organizations that you would say, you know, struggles to really make sure that we are reaching down to community level, and we have to do more in that area. But on a very positive note, which you might like to know about, if you read the document that Aurelian and I both mentioned on climate results metrics that was published last year, in this sort of a horizontal bar that we talk about, this sort of support for clients and countries, is not only transition plans, is also just transition and wider social interlinkages. And we make very clear there that we're looking at gender and conflict and other metrics linked to climate. And there is actually a working group of the MDBs working on gender and climate metrics, or climate and gender metrics, depending on how you look at it, to add to the work that we did, that we published last year. There's also a group working on just transition and how those metrics could be reported. And there was already an event, unfortunately, it was one of the only MDB events that the recording failed. So we have no recording of it, but it was a great discussion. Anyway, that work will continue on both the just transition metrics and importantly on the gender and climate metrics. So hopefully we may be able to come forward next year, even if some of us don't use the word gender, we're still very aware that we all want to talk about half the people on the planet. So however we talk about it, please know that we are working on that gender and climate metrics work quite seriously. Hope that gives you some, and maybe I can connect you actually, since EIB is chairing that subgroup, I can put you in contact with them.
Brilliant. And I think we have another question over here.
Thank you. My name is Stephanie. I'm with a private philanthropy. We are not in the grant giving space, but we're still interested in what can we do to make our money available for helping in investments. But we have not really understood the landscape, really how we can do this in an efficient way. Talking to some peers, and we see them setting up some kind of financial techniques, but getting it in a, let's say, financial institutions role is not what we want to be. Do you see anything where organizations like ours could put in money that is lent, not to sovereign funds, obviously, but more to commercial businesses? What do you see as an opportunity for us?
No, absolutely. Also, like, happy to talk afterwards. Working through MDBs and at IDFC, we do it a lot to help deploy either grant funding, like concessional funding that we can blend with our own financing, and that then get channeled down to the project is, I would say, our bread and butter, and things we've been doing for over a decade, with right framework in terms of how to make sure the concessionality that gets it the right level and target the right incremental incremental risk or incentive. So we have all this framework in place. We have all this platform in place. We've been working over the years with public donors. We are increasingly working now with private philanthropy, and would be very happy to connect and see what kind of project you're interested in, and we can like partner to help channel those funds depending on what you are, what type of project you are targeting, what kind of outcome you're targeting, and we can definitely work with you on that.
So yes, just to, as well as obviously the blending aspect, which is very important when you need an aspect of concessionality to make sure that the project is right and designed in the right way for the clients. I mean, we've been doing that a lot in the health sector in order to make sure that sort of vaccine production and vaccine outreach can be, it's not climate, but it's the same thing, can reach all parts of developing countries where that's needed. So there are lots of examples of that, and I think you find most of the MDBs would like to talk to you about that. The second thing I think that's interesting is we have seen with funds, so with investment funds, nevertheless, even though they are very good in their own right, sometimes in order to, in the country where they're perhaps trying to deliver a business model, to reach the poorest or the most vulnerable clients, you need some technical assistance in that fund. So it's still an investment vehicle, which is financing SMEs. You have investors coming in. There's still something needed. And for example, I give the example of Craft, which is an EIB funded was the first fund for adaptation technologies and services. There's a technical assistance. There's also concessional finance from Luxembourg, which is done through us, as well as our own financing. But there's concessional finance that helps them reach the poorest farmers and the most vulnerable communities in the country, which otherwise, just from a business point of view, is harder to do. So there's a number of ways in which you might find that you can work with us on those things. And I have a colleague in the audience who's from our outside EU team. I just wanted to say one thing because we get to the end, and I forgot to say it at the beginning. And that is that at EIB, we just have our new 5-year plan, where we are walking the talk, staying the course on climate and nature. And importantly, we have brought in a new aspect, whether you would call it how you would call it, transformation or whatever. We call it financing where it matters. And we are focusing on impact. And we're going to be working very hard on those metrics and the ways that we can make sure that we are being as impactful as possible, in addition to the things I said earlier. So I hope that adds to the debate.
Yes, brilliant. Did you want to say something?
Hi, good day. I'm from the Eastern Caribbean, work with the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. One of the key issues we struggle with is in terms of scale and being able to engage, with agencies like yours on opportunities. What insights or what guidance would you give in terms of being able at our small scale to be able to really take advantage of what you're probably offering?
So on our side, have multi-dimension to this issue. First, it's true that scale, and given the type of organization we are, sometimes if the project is too small, it might be difficult for us to intervene. That being said, we are trying more and more to see how we can work with this project that can maybe small compared to the operation, but have big impact and can have big impact at the level of the country, etc. Like how we can help support them. We try then ultimately to see how we can combine, and that's where we create platform to have replicable way, because if we need to reinvent the wheel for every small project, it's a bit difficult. If we can have an approach that is a bit more systemic, and that's what, for instance, we are doing also under our AgriConnect platform to have more resilient agri-system across the world. That's this kind of approach. Like how, if we are clear about the different envelope, how we organize ourselves, etc., how we can have a bigger reach also to the smaller project. And then we want to continue to work more smartly with financial intermediaries, with local banks, create capacity within the local bank, within the regional funds, etc., for them to be able to reach the ultimate lenders or investee company. Finally, the last approach is for us, we try to take as much as we can a value chain approach. So even if we work on a large infrastructure project per se, or industrial project, we try to see how we can include the local ecosystem of SMEs, MSMEs, or communities. So that's the different angle. It's true that we're not always the best organized to be able to deploy capital directly for small projects, but we have different instruments, different partners to be able to do that. And it's very much our priority at IC to grow our support to MSMEs in our market.
Yes, so thank you. So specifically for your region, there's a number of things that we've done and we are doing, which I think help with answer your question. One is working with financial intermediaries, but that includes also the public development banks in the Caribbean countries, also with the Caribbean Development Bank itself, but also through those programs with the technical assistance supporting the regional programs that you already yourselves have created. So you have created, you know, the 5 Cs, you have regional meteorological and hydrological modeling, and many things which you've decided as countries to do regionally, even in regional disaster response programs. So part of the technical assistance that we've been doing in the work that we've been doing in the Caribbean is actually also directed at supporting those regional entities. And then there can be also microfinance opportunities. I don't know that we have a microfinance one in the Caribbean, but we might well have. But we do that through those kind of intermediaries that reach microfinance, very small businesses. But I think primarily, yes, supporting the commercial banks, but also the regional banks to try and make sure that we're reaching out specifically also to the adaptation of SMEs, because often that is forgotten that these are the smallest businesses, the most vulnerable. They're often in one location in the Caribbean, probably a very vulnerable location, and trying to find the right way to reach those very small businesses is something that we have tried to do in the work with the Caribbean Development Bank. We tried to also work through the chambers of commerce in the countries, and actually, if you like, a capacity building of the chambers of commerce so that they could then engage with the businesses in country. It's not everything that's needed, but I think if we can do more of that. And again, if you would like to talk to my colleague, we do have offices in your region, and we're very, very keen to do more adaptation in LDCs and SIDS. So the Caribbean is, you know, one of our top regions for that.
Thank you. Thank you, audience, for your engagement. Anyone else? Gone. Okay, so we actually have another visitor from, I think, Europe, wherever he is. Guillaume from I4CE is going to close us out here. So are we able to spotlight Guillaume or have him come in?
Yes, Europe indeed, Gaia. Thank you. Can you hear me well?
We can hear you. Yeah, you're from the heavens somehow, but yes. And maybe
Okay.
we'll also get you on video, but otherwise, feel free to keep going.
Thank you, Gaia. I'll start by introducing myself. So I'm Guillaume Potier, the head of the Secretariat of the Mainstreaming Climate in Financial Institutions Initiative and Director for Development Finance at I4C. So first, I want to thank you all, starting with our speakers, not only for having survived week 1 of COP, but also for their great insights. I would like also to thank the International Development Finance Club hosting us today. Beyond today's event, IDFC has been a long-standing partner and driving force to move forward the discussion on transformational finance. Thank you also to you, colleagues from WRI, Gaia, for masterfully moderating this discussion, but also Valerie and Caroline, with whom I4C has the honor and pleasure to conduct research on transformational finance. And finally, I would like to thank Sarah Bendau from I4C for all the preparation and coordination ahead of this event. It's always impossible to summarize such rich discussions, so I will only take 3 lessons from today's debate. The first one is that we now have solid conceptual frameworks to work our way towards operational understanding of what is transformational finance. With the research of WRI, we've come up with a working definition of transformational finance with 3 attributes: a focus on lifting systemic obstacles, doubling down on adaptation, and creating an enabling environment. On the other hand, with the research of CPI, we have a 3-level framework that's really clear about project level, market level, and system level, and 10 dimensions to assess the transformational nature of projects and strategies. The second lesson that I take from our discussion is that not only do we have concepts, but we also have pioneer financial institutions willing to turn action and to embed transformative change at the core of their strategies, but also at the core of their activities. So I'll start with IDFC, of course, which is a founding member of the Transformational Finance for Climate Group. of which the Mainstreaming Initiative is also a member, together with UNEP-FI, PRI. As Atika already mentioned, this group already released a position paper proposing 3 concrete actions to advance transformational finance in the coming months and years. The first one is to launch a global dialogue under COP or the NCQG process to consolidate guiding principles for transformational finance. The second one is adopting shared definitions and frameworks across international fora, such as the NCQG, Standing Committee on Finance, Global Stocktake, and of course the COPs. And the final proposition of this group is to integrate transformational principles into financial institution strategies, reporting, and operations. And I agree with Nancy that starting with public development banks would be the priority. And all the other speakers today, actually, beyond IDFC, show prime examples of the diversity of integration of transformational approaches. AFD with its transformational finance target and its underlying infrastructure to assess projects, the sustainable development analysis that Atika presented. IFC with its focus on innovation, the strong push on upstream investment that you presented, and the priority on the measurement of outcomes as opposed to just reporting on inputs. And finally, EIB with Nancy with the focus on delivering results, no matter the level, project, market, or system. And also, I really like the idea of enriching, not substituting, but enriching the traditional volume-centered approach with additional lenses such as just transition, fragility, and gender. And this leads me to the final lesson that I take away from this discussion, is that we still have some work to do to make transformational approaches mainstream, beyond the group of like-minded actors that we represent today. So yes, we've all seen the Circle of Finance Ministers report on the Baku to Belém roadmap. They clearly mentioned the need to unlock systemic changes, systemic impacts. I really like, by the way, how the Baku to Belém roadmap presents itself as a tool, and I quote, to compound transformation towards low carbon and climate resilient development. Nevertheless, we do have those documents, but we still lack a precise pathway shared by a large group of parties with clear measures and defined milestones to generalize a transformational finance approach and agenda. Much like we have, by the way, for MDB evolution, the optimization of vertical climate funds, country platforms, and all other strand of measures that are discussed at Belém. So just to summarize and to conclude, we had negotiation COPs, Belém ambitions to be an implementation COP, but ultimately, if you think about it, implementation only matters insofar as it produces concrete impacts and transformations. So my hope for next year would be that we'll not have an implementation COP, but a transformation COP. And with that wish, back to you, Gaia, and to Belém to conclude this amazing discussion. And thank you again to everyone.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your words, Guillaume, and for everyone else for coming and participating in this conversation, which I think whenever you talk about transformation, you're inevitably going to talk about sort of lots of different things, because there's lots of things that go into transformation. But I hope this conversation was useful in sort of looking first at a framework, or how do you think about this topic, and then a little bit more concretely, how do you take action even if you don't actually call it transformation, because you might have other words you like better. So, yeah, systemic change, which might actually be a little more clear than transformation. So, all right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.